Hey, happy Monday. Hey, I want to say that I'm really happy to be here with you today because last week we talked about patterns. This week I want to break that down even more into really more of the specifics on how the patterns work and how that affects our lives as habits. So happy Monday. I'm really happy you're here. If you're watching this later, thanks for coming back and watching it later. I like to start off my week strong. I like to start them with high energy. I think that the way you start something sets the tone for the rest of it, right? Whether it's the way you start the year, or the way you start the the week or the month or the day, whatever it is. So that's why I'm really big on morning routines. It's also why I like jumping on here and hopefully giving you a little bit of motivation to get you moving, and hopefully that can inspire you to take action. Because I mean, I can do all of these things to motivate you, but if it doesn't inspire you to take action, then it doesn't lead to the transformation that we're really after, right? So motivation can inspire action, but transformation is really what we're after. So I'm happy to be here with you. I'm excited for today because I love talking about habits. I love talking about patterns because it's one of the things that I think can move the needle the most in our life. I actually lost about 90 pounds in less than a year. And it really all came down to a set of really simple habits. Don't you hate it when you can't seem to get rid of the bad habit? And I don't mean just the obvious ones like, substance abuse or violence or things like that. I mean the other ones, the ones that affect us every day, like, giving into fear and procrastination. I mean, things like sleeping in too long or watching too much TV or maybe getting, stuck on doom scrolling. I know it's ironic since this is on social media, but I want to ask you, are you ready to really ditch the bad habits? Are you ready to move forward? Or are you ready to get unstuck? And are you ready for the good habits to finally stick? Are you ready to build those habits and the patterns that could change your life? Because that's what it comes down to. There's a guy called James Clear that wrote a book called Atomic Habits. And I like the way you put that, because atomic is like these little, tiny building blocks of life, basically, right? So it takes all of these little habits. It takes these tiny little atomic habits, or these tiny little things in our life that builds the momentum, that builds that true um, lasting change in our life. But here's the thing. It all starts with being aware of the patterns, right? I have another video on my channel here that really goes into the patterns, how to really break down patterns, and the 3 skills of success. I highly recommend you go watch that one. But real quickly, the 3 skills are pattern recognition. So you have to be able to actually see what's going on. You have to recognize that pattern. Second one is pattern utilization. So how do you actually use the pattern that you've recognized, right? And then pattern creation. That's where you hit the level of mastery. That's where you start to create your own patterns. So what the heck does that have to do with breaking bad habits and creating or sticking to good ones? Well, recognizing your pattern is the first key to changing any kind of behavior. And I want you to remember this. And if you got something to write it on, I would highly recommend you write this down. All behavior is driven by the desire to solve a problem. I'll say that again. All behavior is driven by the desire to solve a problem. Because our brains are problem-solving machines. No matter what happens, when our brain is always trying to find answers. It's a puzzle solver. That's one of the reasons that questions are so powerful, to really dig into our subconscious and dig into what's really important in our life. Because when we ask ourselves questions, our brain just automatically wants to answer, right? That's how it works. So our brain is always trying to solve problems. So think about it when you're like when you notice something good, you want that, right? When you notice something that, and I don't mean something that someone else has. I just mean you see a pattern, you experience that situation, and it's something that's good, right? Like for example, when you eat something, right? You experience something that's good, and you want to continue that pattern. But then on the reverse side, when you experience pain, you want to relieve it and you want to avoid it in the future, right? So when I was overweight, I had a problem. I felt uncomfortable. I didn't like the way I look. I couldn't play with my kids without getting winded, and I was experiencing pain, and I wanted to get away from that, right? So I want to ask you right now, how about you? What are some pains in your life? Do you procrastinate? Do you know that you should go knock on those doors, but you're not doing it? Do you know that you should make those cold calls or post that video on social media? Do you find yourself just continually procrastinating? I'll tell you right now, the reason that that's happening is because you're either you're trying to avoid pain, and you're gaining some sort of pleasure from avoiding that pain, right? So it's the pleasure of not having um, to give into that, or not have to face your fear, right? Maybe it's like I said, maybe it's cold calls, maybe it's knocking on doors, maybe it's having that meeting with your team, maybe it's having that conversation that you've been putting off, whatever it is. And then social media, like I said, I know the irony, but social media is especially bad because it creates this dopamine rush, which basically numbs the pain. So that's one of the main reasons that anytime someone's going through something traumatic, they'll go straight to social media and they'll start scrolling, because it creates a distraction, and it creates this um, this dopamine rush, which then kind of dulls the pain. So how do you actually break out of a bad habit? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You actually use the urge to avoid pain and gain pleasure to your advantage. So you already have those two urges, right? We all have two urges: either the urge to gain pleasure, or the urge to avoid pain. And so you can actually use those to your advantage. You know, James Clear and Charles Duhigg, they both have books about habits. So James Clear is Atomic Habits, and Charles Duhigg is The Power of Habit. But they both talk about what's called a habit loop. So to me, this is the perfect illustration of how you can use pain and pleasure to replace a destructive pattern or habit with a constructive pattern or habit. And I talked about this last week, but to me, when you think of it as good habits and bad habits, it's not as useful for your brain to be able to overcome that. Just because, for the most part, our brain, like I said, it's a problem-solving machine. So our brain thinks in patterns, it thinks in problems. So is this a constructive habit? Is this something that's continuously helping me overcome a problem, or is it something that's making it worse? So it's one of the main questions I like to ask myself anytime that I'm facing a problem or facing a challenge or facing something. Is I ask myself, is this bringing me closer to or further away from the person that I want to become? So, and then that makes your brain has to answer it. So is this bringing me closer to or further away? So James Clear talks about the 4 laws of behavior change. And that's how you create a good habit. So here's how it works. I'm going to break it down for you real quick. So the first law is make it obvious. So this is the cue for the behavior. That's why I said it's so important to recognize that pattern, because that's the first step. We have to know what's happening to do anything about it, right? So the first law for instance, for my health journey when I lost 90 pounds was that I put my workout equipment in a super obvious place. It's right out there where every time I walk by the patio, it's, I see it. And I see it no matter what. And this made that cue or the trigger unavoidable. It was right there, and it was at top of mind. So what would that look like for you? What would what would you need to make the cue or the trigger for your new habit totally unavoidable and totally obvious? So maybe you need to print out a flyer or put sticky notes all over the house that have the like the Nike mantra, just do it, or whatever it is, right? Maybe you need to have certain reminders on your phone, maybe whatever it is, but make it obvious, right? Make the cue or the trigger for the new habit that you want to pick up, make it super obvious. The second law is to make it attractive. So this is the craving that's going to initiate the behavior. It's going to start this process of actually, taking action on the behavior. So the way I did this was I imagined being able to chase my 2-year-old without getting winded. And that sounds funny, but to me, it was a really attractive thing because I wanted to be able to connect with my son. And I felt really, bad not being able to keep up with him. And I'm not that old, and I should be able to run around with my 2-year-old without feeling like I'm going to pass out. So maybe for you, you get picture your dream home or dream vacation or something and put it on the wall so that the habit of following through is attractive. That's why vision boards can be pretty powerful. That depends on the person. Sometimes vision boards are more powerful for some people than others. It just depends on the situation. But make it attractive. And then the third law is make it easy. So this is the response for the craving to take action. So that's when we're actually going to go ahead and take the action. So for my health journey, what I would do is I would set up everything. I would set up everything the night before, so that when I got up and it was time to work out, it was easy. I didn't have to put in that, all this effort to actually perform the action. So I made things easy. So maybe, what would that look like for you? How can you make it easy? Maybe for your cold calls or team meetings, you build a routine or a script or something that makes it so easy to follow through that you just kind of feel stupid not to, right? So make it easy. For another health example is if you have like a cookie jar, right? And it's right there. It's obvious, right? It's right there where you can grab a cookie. It's attractive. It's something that you would like to have. It's attractive. It's in a nice area where you can just get to it. And then it's easy, right? It's super accessible. What if you just replace the cookie jar with like a bowl of apples, right? So that when you want to go snack, you grab something, the healthier alternative, and then eventually that starts to become a habit. So those are the three. And then the last one, the fourth law is make it satisfying. So this is the reward we get for the behavior. This part is, I can't stress this enough. This is critical to remember because sometimes the reward for something can feel kind of ambiguous, right? We think, well, I'm obviously going to get a reward for it, but we don't focus enough on the reward. We don't focus enough on the celebration. The reward has to be really clear in our mind to really continue to perform the behavior. Because who wants to go through a bunch of pain for no reason, right? You want that reward. You want that celebration at the end. So for me, this was the satisfaction of following through. And the fact that eventually I started to lose the weight. It took me a while to get to the point where I actually started losing it. But then plus on top of that, after a while, the way I am today, I actually feel really good after working out. I work out like a maniac and I feel like I'm, really, really tired afterwards. But after a few minutes, I feel alive, right? And that's the amazing thing about your physiology and really getting up and moving is it changes your state. It makes you feel alive. So what would that be for you? What would the reward be for you? Is it, maybe the reward is that you get an interested prospect, or you set up a listing presentation, or you get a new person on your team, whatever it is. So it's going to be different for everyone, but it's so important to have that reward for a good habit and to know what it is, because we want to feed our mind with with clarity. I get so many people that say, I'm not very good at achieving my goals. And what I've noticed time and time again is it's usually not that you're not good at achieving your goals, you're just not very clear on what they are. And then on top of that, it's also really important to celebrate every single win you have. I mean, all of them, especially the small ones. I would say especially the small ones, because then you're reinforcing in your mind that this is good, right? This is something that we want to build. And your brain just responds to those types of stimulus. And if you're not celebrating and getting some kind of reward every time that behavior is performed, then you're not going to continue to do that. That's just all there is to it. So that's how you create a good habit. So you go, you have the cue, so you make it obvious. You've got the craving, so you make it attractive, right? You've got the response, so you make it easy, to perform that task, and then you have the reward, so you make it satisfying. So that's how you create a good habit, but how do you break a bad one? Well, here's the funny thing. It's almost too simple. You just reverse or kind of invert the laws of the behavior change. So number one would be, instead of making it obvious, make it invisible. So get rid of the cookies and the donuts, right? Maybe take social media off your phone so that you aren't tempted to doom scroll. So remove all the cues that may trigger the behavior. Number two is instead of making it attractive, make it unattractive. Excuse me. So maybe imagine what that cookie is going to turn into when it gets into your body. Picture that fat and how it's going to make you feel. Think about all the opportunities you're going to miss out on if you continue to procrastinate. So make it unattractive. I don't want to follow through on this because all this stuff is going to happen. And then number three is, instead of making it easy, make it difficult. So maybe shop at healthier stores so that when you're tempted to eat sugar, it's kind of a pain to go get it, right? It's maybe set reminders and make commitments to other people. So it's hard to go back on your word and not follow through. It's hard to procrastinate. It's actually more difficult to procrastinate than to just get it done, right? One of the things that I like to think about is when I'm about to do a task and my procrastination brain kicks in. We all have it, okay? So I'm not singling you out. We all have it. And when the procrastination is like, maybe I'll just do it later, I think, I'm going to think about procrastinating later. So kind of, I know it sounds so stupid, but turn it on itself. Use the procrastination on itself. It's like, I kind of feel like procrastinating, kind of feel like putting this off, but I'm going to think about that later. I'm going to think about procrastinating later. So it sounds funny, but it actually works. So kind of turn it on itself. And then number four is, instead of making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. Think about, how sluggish and sick you're going to feel after eating unhealthy food. Think about how terrible you're going to feel if you waste hours doing something that doesn't bring you closer to your goals. Think about the consequence of not following through and not getting those leads that you need. I mean, eventually, what does that lead to? Well, you can't pay rent and you can't feed your family. Eventually, it leads to the point where it's this completely unsatisfying outcome. So try to think of those outcomes. So that's how you build good habits. That's how you break bad ones. And remember, you always have to have a constructive habit to replace the destructive one, or else it's going to create this void that's going to be automatically filled with something else, because nature hates a vacuum. So the key is to be intentional about your habits, your life, and your business. It's all about being intentional. And hey, if you're an ambitious realtor or a leader in real estate, I would love to connect with you about some simple habit shifts that can move mountains in your life. It's done incredible things for me, and it's all those little shifts, those little habits. And those can make a huge difference in your life. So just click the link in my bio. Let's have a chat and see what that looks like for you. So what I want to say today is, audit your habits today. I know it went a little bit long, but I get kind of excited about talking about habits. But audit your habits. Really pull apart the habits that you have, whether they're constructive or destructive, and see how you can start to reverse those. So audit those today. And thank you for being here. Happy Monday. And I will see you soon. Bye.